Imagine riding alone through the frozen Kentucky mountains, exhausted, grieving, desperate for any flicker of human warmth. Then you see it, lamplight spilling from a lonely inn, four beautiful sisters smiling at the door, calling you by name before you even speak. You think you've found salvation. You've actually stepped into your grave. The wind that night carried the smell of snow long before the first flake fell. It came down the narrow spine of the Cumberland Plateau like a living thing, howling through pine and hemlock, rattling the shutters of the few cabins that dared cling to those heights. Men who rode the wilderness road in winter knew that sound. It was the voice of the mountains reminding you that you were small, temporary, and, most nights, utterly alone. But on the ridge above Pine Creek, one set of windows always glowed amber against the dark. Millbrook Inn, for chimneys breathing wood smoke into the black sky. A hand-painted sign swinging above the gate that read, in careful, welcoming letters, "Rest for the weary, warmth for the soul." Travelers spoke of the place the way sailors once spoke of sirens. Not with fear, at first, but with a kind of aching reverence. A merchant from Lexington would reroute his wagon 20 dangerous miles just to sleep one more night beneath its roof. A widowed preacher from Virginia was known to weep openly at the breakfast table when it came time to leave. Cattle drovers, hardened men who'd killed Comanche and outrun cholera, would lower their voices in saloons from Nashville to Pittsburgh and say the same thing. The Cunningham sisters, they'll treat you like you're the only man left in the world. And for a little while, you believed it was love. But love leaves footprints. Love writes letters. Love comes looking when you don't come home. 43 men rode up that mountain between 1832 and 1854. 43 men never rode down. Tonight, you're going to walk through that door with them. You're going to smell the venison stew and the beeswax candles. You're going to feel Catherine's fingers brush yours as she pours your coffee. And you're going to learn exactly what happened when the fire burned low and the sisters decided a man had outlived his usefulness. This is the true story of Millbrook Inn. And it begins not with murder, but with a death that looked exactly like mercy. The autumn leaves had already fallen when Jeremiah Cunningham started coughing blood into the quilt his wife had sewn the year they married. Consumption doesn't care how many acres you own or how many travelers pay you silver to sleep under your roof. It took Jeremiah in 6 cruel weeks, wasting a once powerful man down to a whispering skeleton who died clutching his eldest daughter's hand. Margaret was 26. She sat beside the bed in a black dress already sewn for mourning, eyes dry, jaw set. When the preacher asked if she wanted to say any final words over her father's body, she answered in a voice flat as winter iron. He built all this so we would never have to beg. We won't start now. Behind her, her sisters stood in birth order like steps on a staircase descending into shadow. Catherine, 24, the beauty men wrote bad poetry about even when they'd only seen her once. Hair the color of midnight water, eyes the pale gray of storm clouds before hail. She could smile at a man and make him forget his own name. Sarah, 22, quiet as creek stones, hands always stained green from crushing herbs in the root cellar. She knew which plants eased pain and which plants stopped a heart so gently the victim sighed in his sleep and simply never woke up. And Elizabeth, sweet 16-year-old Elizabeth, who still cried at funerals and fed every stray cat that wandered up the mountain. The one travelers trusted first because her eyes had never learned how to lie. Their mother had died birthing Elizabeth. Now their father was gone. For women, 800 acres of mountain land and a 2-story inn that sat like a fat purse on the most traveled road between Virginia and the western frontier. Any man in 3 states would have called it a fortune. Margaret Cunningham called it leverage. The funeral was small. Ezra Hawthorne, the grizzled foreman who'd worked for Jeremiah since the War of 1812, stood hat in hand and swore he'd guard the family with his life. The Zimmer brothers, Klaus and Heinrich, 2 silent Germans who'd crossed the ocean with nothing but axes and hunger, stood behind him like pale bookends. They'd bury any secret the sisters asked them to bury. They already knew that. Winter came hard that year. Snow sealed the gaps. The wilderness road turned into a white scar across the mountains, and every traveler who managed to claw his way through the drifts carried the same haunted look. Half frozen, half starved for anything soft and human. The sisters were ready. Margaret kept the books in perfect columns. Every egg sold, every pound of coffee, every dollar that crossed the threshold. Catherine stood at the door each evening in a burgundy dress cut just low enough to remind a man he was still alive. Sarah stirred something fragrant on the hearth that smelled like home, even if you'd never had one. And Elizabeth carried warm bricks wrapped in flannel to slip beneath the blankets of men who hadn't felt gentle hands in years. Word spread faster than smallpox. By spring of 1832, Millbrook Inn wasn't just profitable. It was legendary. Men began planning their routes around it. Some came back again and again, inventing excuses, lost cattle, delayed shipments, anything to justify another night, another week. They brought gifts, silk from New Orleans, French brandy, pocket watches, land deeds. They wrote letters home that glowed with gratitude and something dangerously close to worship. And the sisters smiled and poured coffee and listened to every lonely story as if it were the first time a man had ever been broken. But Margaret watched the ledgers. She noticed a pattern. The men who stayed longest, who spent most lavishly, who wept when they left. They were always the ones with no one waiting for them anywhere else. Widowers, childless brothers, second sons who'd been cut out of wills. Men whose names would fade from memory the way smoke fades from a chimney. Margaret began keeping a second set of books, not in ink, in memory. And on a November evening in 1832, when the first hard frost silvered the grass and the mountains seemed to hold their breath, a rider came up the switchback trail alone. Thomas Kellerman, 45 years old, coat of good Richmond wool, boots hand-stitched in Philadelphia, a purse heavy with gold eagles, and a letter in his pocket he'd never mail, addressed to a wife buried the previous winter. His horse was lathered and trembling. The man himself looked worse. Margaret saw him from the porch before he saw her. She noted the way he swayed in the saddle, the way his eyes searched the windows like a drowning man searching for light. She stepped forward, lantern raised, and the smile she gave him was the first gentle thing he'd felt in 11 months. "Lord have mercy," she said, soft enough to sound like prayer. "You look half dead, Mr. Kellerman," he rasped. "Thomas Kellerman. I was told this was a Christian house." "It is," Margaret answered. "Come in before the night finishes what the mountain started." Inside, the common room wrapped around him like arms. Beeswax candles flickered in glass hurricanes. The fire roared high enough to paint the log walls gold. Venison stew bubbled in a kettle that had belonged to their grandmother. And Catherine moved like music made flesh, taking his hat, his coat, pressing a mug of something hot and spiced into his numb fingers. He drank and closed his eyes, and for the first time since Mary's funeral, Thomas Kellerman felt the awful weight in his chest loosen just a little. Sarah appeared with warm water and soft cloth to wash the road from his hands. Elizabeth, little more than a child, knelt to pull off his muddy boots, humming a hymn their mother used to sing. He tried to protest. He was only one man. They shouldn't fuss. But Catherine laid a hand on his shoulder and said, "Hush now. Out here, kindness isn't charity. It's survival." That night, he slept in the corner room overlooking the valley. Clean sheets that smelled of sunshine and lavender. A fire banked high enough to chase the mountain chill. And sometime past midnight, when the house settled into silence, he woke to find Catherine sitting beside his bed, moonlight silver on her cheek. "You were crying in your sleep?" she whispered. He hadn't even known. Over the next 3 days, Thomas Kellerman lived the closest thing to resurrection a man can know this side of the grave. Sarah fed him like a convalescent, rich broths, honey cakes, dark mountain coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Margaret spoke with him for hours about cattle prices and land values, treating his opinions like scripture. Elizabeth read to him from the book of Psalms in a voice so sweet it made the old words feel new. And Catherine gave him what no decent woman should have, and exactly what his broken heart begged for. On the second night, after the other guests had gone to bed, She came to him again. No lantern this time, just the glow of embers and the weight of shared grief. She listened while he spoke of Mary, of the child they never had, of the empty chair at his table, of waking each morning to a house that echoed with her absence. Catherine cried with him, real tears, or tears so perfect they might as well have been real. When he kissed her, trembling like a boy, she let him. When he whispered that he'd sell everything, stay forever, build a life here if she'd have him, she pressed her forehead to his and said, some gifts are too precious to rush. On the morning he was supposed to leave, Thomas Kellerman paid Margaret triple the usual rate, pressed an extra $20 gold piece into Elizabeth's small hand, and promised all 4 sisters he would return within the month, this time to stay. He rode away smiling. The sun was just breaking over the ridge, turning the frost to diamonds. His horse was rested, his purse considerably lighter, his heart foolishly full. Half a mile down the trail, where the pines grew thick and the road narrowed to a knife's edge, Heinrich Zimmer stepped out from behind a boulder. He moved without sound. The hammer, short-handled, heavy, the kind used for splitting wagon tongues, was already swinging. Thomas Kellerman never even had time to be afraid. One moment, he was dreaming of a future that smelled like Catherine's hair. The next, the world exploded into black. Heinrich caught the body before it hit the ground. Klaus was waiting with the mule and the canvas roll. By the time the sun cleared the treetops, Thomas Kellerman was just another mound of freshly turned earth in a clearing no map would ever show. That night, the 4 sisters gathered in the kitchen after the lamps were turned low. Margaret laid the dead man's purse on the table. Gold glinted like candle flames frozen in metal. Sarah measured out a pinch of something pale and powdery into a cup of tea she would never drink. Just testing, always testing. Elizabeth sat very still, hands folded in her lap, staring at the coins as if waiting for them to speak. Catherine broke the silence. He would have given us everything anyway, she said softly. In another month, another year, he was already ours. Margaret's voice was winter glass. But this way no one comes looking. No letters. No questions. No competition. She looked at each of her sisters in turn. We keep the inn spotless. We keep the welcome warm. And when the time is right, we keep the profit. Elizabeth's whisper barely stirred the air. Was it very wrong? Margaret reached across the table and took her youngest sister's chin, gentle but unbreakable. Wrong is starving when the world owes you plenty. Wrong is burying your father with nothing but debts and prayers. What we did was justice, Lizzie. The Lord helps those who help themselves and forgives those clever enough not to get caught. Outside, the wind picked up again, moaning through the eaves like a warning or maybe a benediction. 42 more men would ride up that road in the years to come. 42 more graves would wait beneath the pines. And Millbrook Inn would keep its lamps burning bright, offering love to any traveler lonely enough to believe it was free. But that's only the beginning. The first grave taught them mercy. The second grave taught them method. By the 40th, they had perfected both. Winter of 1832 to 33 was a schoolhouse in blood. Snow sealed the mountain for months. No travelers came. The sisters had nothing to do but sit by the fire and perfect the art of making murder look like the hand of God. Margaret laid it out like a battle plan on the kitchen table, candlelight carving hard shadows across her face. We are not thieves, she said. Thieves get caught. We are reapers. And the Lord himself said the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. She drew a circle on the oilcloth with a burnt stick. Inside the circle, the perfect victim. Outside the circle, everyone else, too risky, too loud, too loved. The perfect victim had 5 marks against his soul. Traveling alone, carrying more money than family. No wife waiting with a candle in the window. No fixed date he was expected anywhere. A hunger in his eyes that could be fed and then starved to death. Sarah listened with the stillness of deep water. She was already turning pages in her herbal, dog-eared, stained, annotated in a private cipher only she could read. Pokeweed berries, she murmured, make a man sweat and void himself until he thinks it's cholera. Foxglove swells the heart until it bursts like an overfilled wineskin. Water hemlock is beautiful. The body locks rigid, eyes wide open, as if the soul is trying to crawl out through the pupils and can't quite make it. She looked up almost shy. I can make death look like anything the Lord might do. Catherine said nothing for a long time. She stared into the fire until the flames painted moving angels on her cheekbones. Then she spoke, so softly the others leaned in. Men don't fear poison half as much as they fear being forgotten. Give them someone who remembers their name, someone who makes them feel chosen, and they'll drink damnation from your hand and call it communion. Elizabeth, still only 17, wrapped her arms around herself as if the room had suddenly gone cold. "Will God forgive us?" she whispered. Margaret reached across the table and took her youngest sister's face in hands that had already counted Thomas Kellerman's gold. God forgave David for Uriah. He forgave Jacob for stealing his brother's birthright. He forgave Rahab for lying to save the spies. He helps those who help themselves, Lizzie, and if he wants to judge us, he'll have to dig up the mountain to do it. Outside, the wind howled like something trying to get in. Spring came late in 1833, but when it came, it brought William Fraser riding ahead of it. 38 years old, tobacco dust still clinging to his boots, $500 silver sewn into the lining of his saddle. He arrived in a cold April rain that turned the road to red soup. Margaret saw him from the porch and felt the old familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, not guilt, but the clean, bright anticipation of a hunter sighting a 12-point buck. She stepped into the downpour without a shawl, smiling like the sun had come out just for him. "Mr. Fraser, you'll catch your death out here. Come inside. Let us take care of you." He never stood a chance. They moved like a single organism now, for heads, one purpose. Sarah fed him plate after plate of food so rich it felt like absolution. Cornbread soaked in bacon grease, ham cured in molasses and mountain sage. Apple stack cake layered 17 times with dried apple love. Elizabeth sat at the piano their mother had shipped over the mountains before she died, playing soft hymns that made Fraser's eyes fill with tears he didn't understand. Margaret talked crop prices and land values until he felt like a man among equals instead of solitary miser counting coins in empty rooms. And Catherine became the daughter he never had and the lover he'd stopped daring to dream about, all in the same breath. On the third night, she found him in the common room reading Wordsworth by lamplight, his lips moving silently over lines he'd memorized to keep the loneliness at bay. She stood in the doorway in a simple white dress, hair loose down her back, candle in her hand throwing gold across the floorboards. "Read to me," she said, voice trembling just enough. "I never learned my letters proper, but I love beautiful words." For 2 hours, William Fraser's voice grew stronger, younger, as he read of daffodils and solitude and hearts that dance with the eternal. When he closed the book, Catherine laid her hand on his wrist. "You have the most beautiful voice I ever heard," she whispered. "It makes me feel less alone." Fraser, hard, solitary Fraser who hadn't touched another human being with tenderness in 15 years, began to cry. That night, he asked her to marry him. She let him kiss her like a man kisses salvation. The next 7 days were a slow, exquisite poisoning. Sarah introduced the pokeweed in tiny, loving doses. First a pinch in his evening tea for the digestion, then a little more, then a little more. He grew pale, then feverish, then deliriously happy, convinced the sickness was love itself burning through him. On the final night, Catherine invited him to her room. She had laid a small table with beeswax candles and Sarah's best damask cloth. Venison and blackberry sauce. A bottle of blackberry wine, laced with water hemlock, so finely ground it dissolved like sugar. They ate. They talked of the farm they would build together, the children they would have, the quiet life far from the world's cruelty. Fraser raised his glass. "To the woman who gave me back my life." Catherine smiled over the rim of her own untouched cup. "And to the man who will never be alone again." An hour later, he began to tremble. First his hands, then his arms, then his whole body locking rigid as the poison seized his nervous system like the fist of God. Catherine held him while the convulsions came, stroking his hair, whispering the 23rd Psalm against his ear as his eyes bulged in terror. Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. He died staring into her face, trying to scream, unable to make a sound. When it was over, she closed his eyes with 2 gentle fingers and kissed his forehead exactly once. Then she opened the door and called softly down the hall. It's time. The Zimmer brothers carried him out wrapped in his own best blanket. Ezra Hawthorne dug the grave in the little family cemetery behind the smokehouse. Deep, neat, respectful. By morning, William Fraser had a carved limestone marker that read, "Here lies William James Fraser, beloved guest of Millbrook Inn, taken suddenly to his reward. April 19th, 1833. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Travelers who saw it later would pause, remove their hats, maybe say a prayer. None ever guessed the corpse lay 6 feet under with his mouth still frozen in that last silent scream. The silver dollars bought new curtains for the guest rooms, soft green velvet that made every man feel like he was sleeping in Eden. And the machine kept turning. Year after year, season after season, they learned to space the deaths like planting. Never too many in one harvest, or the field grows suspicious. Some men died in their beds of heart failure after nights of ecstasy. Some succumbed to cholera in the privy, doubled over in agony, while Sarah held a cool cloth to their foreheads and whispered comfort. One particularly wealthy Baltimore banker fell from the Ridge Trail during a hunting accident arranged by Ezra. His skull shattered on rocks 100 feet below, while Catherine wept prettily for the search party. Each death bought something beautiful: a new piano, crystal decanters, silk dresses from New Orleans, a silver tea service engraved with intertwining C's, and always, always, the guest book filled with glowing praise. Never have I known such Christian kindness. The Cunningham sisters are angels in human form. I leave a better man than I arrived. 43 names crossed out in Margaret's private ledger, written in lamb's blood, ink only she knew how to mix. 43 graves hidden in caves, under floorboards, beneath the herb garden, behind the smokehouse, beneath the innocent little cemetery that looked so peaceful in the morning mist. And through it all, Catherine grew more radiant, Sarah more silent, Elizabeth more watchful, Margaret more rich. They began to believe their own myth, that they were untouchable, that the mountain itself protected them, that God, if he was watching, had chosen to look away. But mountains keep every secret eventually. And in the autumn of 1845, a railroad surveyor named Obadiah Jenkins rode up the trail with chains and transits and a commission from the state of Kentucky that would cut straight through the heart of their empire. Obadiah Jenkins was 41, unmarried, friendless, and, most dangerous of all, curious. He asked too many questions. He measured things that had never needed measuring before. He noticed that the soil in certain clearings was darker, richer, wrong. And when Catherine smiled at him the way she had smiled at 42 men before him, Obadiah Jenkins did something no one else ever had. He smiled back and did not fall in love. Some sins are so heavy the earth itself refuses to swallow them forever. By 1845, the ridge above Pine Creek looked like Eden perfected. Whitewashed fences, apple orchards heavy with fruit, a new wing added to the inn, 6 extra rooms with real glass windows that caught the sunrise like fire. Travelers rode away speaking of the Cunningham sisters in the hushed tones men reserve for saints and miracles. They never noticed that the herb garden had grown strangely lush in certain corners, or that the little family cemetery now held more headstones than any one family could account for, or that the wind sometimes carried a faint, sweet-rot smell from the caves no trail ever led to. The sisters had become myth in their own lifetime. Margaret wore silk now, black as a judge's robe, and sat on the county merchant's board like a queen. Sarah's medicines were sought from 3 counties away. She could cure a fever in a child or stop a heart in a grown man with the same quiet hands. Catherine taught Sunday school with the voice of an angel and the eyes of something that had forgotten how to blink. Elizabeth, 29 now, still soft-spoken, organized barn dances where every lonely farmer swore she was the sweetest creature God ever let live. They tithed generously. They loaned money at fair interest. They smiled in church while the preacher praised their Christian charity. And beneath the floorboards, in ledgers bound in black leather, Margaret kept count. 1845 to 36, 1846 to 39, 1847 to 41, 1848 to 43. 43. The number felt final, almost biblical, like the years the Israelites wandered, like the stripes on the Savior's back. Margaret began to believe they had been chosen, that God had looked away on purpose. He hadn't. He was only waiting. The first crack appeared in the winter of 1849. Heinrich Zimmer, quiet, reliable Heinrich who had swung the hammer that ended Thomas Kellerman 17 years earlier, took a .50 caliber ball through the thigh on a deer hunt. The bone shattered. The wound never truly healed. Sarah kept him alive with laudanum and willow bark tea, but pain is a patient teacher. It taught Heinrich to remember faces. At night he saw them standing at the foot of his cot, 43 men in rotting clothes, mouths sewn shut with pine needles, eyes wide and pleading. He started drinking the laudanum by the cup instead of the spoonful. He started talking in his sleep. Klaus, his older brother, told him to shut up. But Klaus had never been the sensitive one. By February 1850, Heinrich was a ghost haunting his own body, skin gray, eyes red-rimmed, hands shaking so badly he couldn't hold a coffee cup. On the morning of February 12th, he staggered through knee-deep snow to the kitchen door while Sarah was alone, rolling biscuit dough for a merchant from Raleigh who was already marked for harvest. He felt his knees on the threshold. "I see them," he rasped in broken English. "Every night. 43. They stand around my bed. They know my name, Sarah. They know what I done." Sarah never flinched. She wiped flour from her hands, knelt, and cupped his stubbled cheek exactly the way she had once cupped dying men's faces to pour poison between their lips. "Hush now, Heinrich. It's the medicine talking. You're fevered." "No." His voice cracked like thin ice. "I helped bury them. I carried them like cordwood. I will burn for it. We all will." He was crying now, great, ugly sobs that shook his whole frame. Sarah glanced up at the ceiling. The merchant was still asleep. The house was quiet. She made her choice in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Come to the still house tonight," she whispered. "After supper. We'll talk proper. I'll give you something to quiet the dreams forever." Heinrich nodded, grateful, already tasting relief. That night Sarah cooked the Zimmer brothers a celebration dinner. Roast goose, sweet potatoes and molasses, blackberry pie. She opened a bottle of her best elderberry wine, the one she saved for very special occasions. Klaus ate sparingly. He never had much appetite for drink. Heinrich drank like a man dying of thirst. 3 hours later he was dead in his bunk, face peaceful, heart stopped cold by a dose of foxglove, so concentrated it could have killed Knox. Klaus found him at dawn. Sarah wept prettily at the funeral, tears real enough to fool the preacher. She told Klaus it was his brother's heart, weakened by the old wound and the laudanum both. Klaus said nothing, but something behind his eyes turned to stone. The second crack came in March 1851. Samuel Hartwell, 54, widowed, cotton broker from Savannah, rode up the mountain with a leather satchel containing $1,200 in gold and banknotes. He was supposed to meet a business partner in Pittsburgh on April 2nd. He never arrived. Hartwell was the last. The 44th, named Margaret, would never get to write. He died the old way. 3 nights of Catherine's whispered promises, Sarah's slow poison, a heart attack in the lavender-scented sheets of the corner room. But this time the world pushed back. The Pittsburgh Associate wired telegrams. Telegrams became letters. Letters became a visit from Sheriff Thomas Brennan, 47 years old, former Texas Ranger, a man who had seen too much death to believe in convenient coincidences. Brennan came to the inn polite as Sunday. Margaret served him coffee in the good china. Ezra swore Hartwell had ridden away healthy on March 28th. The guest register confirmed it. But Brennan had already talked to a blacksmith in Pineville who shot a bay gelding with a distinctive cracked hoof on April 4th, 6 days after Hartwell supposedly left Millbrook. He talked to a merchant who sold coffee and tobacco to a man matching Hartwell's description on April 5th, wearing the same green cravat Hartwell's partner remembered. Little things, grains of sand that together made a mountain. Brennan started digging, quietly, carefully, through 20 years of missing person reports. 15 names that ended at Millbrook Inn, then 29, then 37. And always the same story. Departed in good health. Never seen again. He watched the sisters from a distance. He saw Klaus Zimmer limp into town for supplies, eyes darting like a hunted animal. On the evening of April 14th, 1851, Brennan met Klaus in a barn 3 miles from the inn, lantern low, revolver on his knee. Klaus lasted 11 minutes. He never said the sisters' names out loud. Loyalty went bone deep, but he told enough. Late-night burials. The cave behind the rockfall. The way Heinrich screamed in his sleep before he died. The smell that sometimes came from the garden after rain. It was enough. Dawn, April 15th, 1851. 8 deputies and 2 federal marshals rode up the switchback trail single file, rifles across their saddles, warrants folded inside Brennan's coat. The mountain was still asleep, mist curling through the pines like ghosts trying to warn someone. They surrounded the house before the roosters woke. Brennan kicked in the front door with one boot, heavy oak splintering like Judgment Day. Margaret was first down the stairs, hair loose, black robe clutched at her throat. Catherine followed, barefoot, face pale but composed. Sarah came next, hands already raised, eyes calculating angles of escape that didn't exist. Elizabeth, 30 now, still the baby, stood on the landing and began to cry without sound. Margaret Cunningham, Brennan said, voice flat as a gravestone. You and your sisters are under arrest for suspicion of murder. Multiple counts. Margaret's chin lifted. Sheriff, there must be some mistake. We are God-fearing women who... Save it for the judge, ma'am. Or for hell. I reckon both will have plenty of time to listen. They searched for 3 days. They started with the little cemetery. 13 headstones that didn't match family records. The first coffin they opened held not a Cunningham ancestor, but a man in a moldering green cravat, gold still sewn into the lining of his coat. Samuel Hartwell opened his blind eyes to daylight for the first time in a month. They moved to the garden. Beneath the Angelica and foxglove, they found 5 shallow graves. Recent ones, soil still soft. Then the caves. Behind a rockfall no casual traveler would ever move, they found the charnel house. Skulls stacked like cordwood, rib cages tangled with roots. 43 bodies in varying stages of decay. Some still wearing the clothes they died in, some stripped naked and folded into crevices like discarded dolls. One deputy vomited until he dry-heaved. Another, a church deacon, fell to his knees in the cave mouth and prayed out loud in a broken voice. They found a black ledger hidden beneath Margaret's bedroom floorboards. 43 names. Dates. Amounts taken. The last entry in Margaret's perfect copperplate. Hartwell, Samuel, March 27th to 30th, 1851. $1,200 plus. Method, digitalis plus nightshade. Disposed, cemetery plot 14. When they led the sisters out in irons, the sun was high and merciless. Margaret walked first, head high, staring straight ahead as if the crowd of neighbors gathered on the road simply didn't exist. Catherine followed, eyes on the ground, lips moving, maybe prayer, maybe curse. Sarah came next, calm as winter water, already calculating which poisons might work on a man through prison food. Elizabeth was last. She was sobbing so hard she could barely walk. A deputy had to half-carry her. As they passed the garden, she suddenly wrenched free, fell to her knees in the dirt, and began clawing at the soil with manacled hands. "I'm sorry," she screamed to the earth itself. I'm sorry, we didn't mean." Margaret never looked back. The trial lasted 9 days. The jury took 43 minutes. On July 12, 1851, beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver, 4 ropes were knotted on the new gallows built specially for the occasion. The preacher asked if they had any final words. Margaret spoke first, voice clear enough to carry to the back of the crowd. "We gave them love when no one else would. We gave them peace. If that is a crime, then hang us for it." Catherine said nothing. She was looking toward the ridge where the inn still stood, windows dark now, waiting for fire. Sarah smiled, small, almost tender, and whispered something only the hangman heard. Elizabeth could not speak at all. She wept until the trap dropped. The bodies hung until sunset. Then they were cut down and buried in unmarked graves outside the prison walls, refused even the decency of consecrated ground. Then burned 3 nights later. No one ever proved who set the fire, but the flames rose so high they lit the underside of the clouds blood red for miles. People said if you rode past the ruins on certain autumn evenings, you could still smell beeswax and venison stew on the wind. And here, beneath it, the faintest echo of a woman's voice offering coffee to a traveler who would never leave. 43 men finally had their names back, and the mountain, after 19 years of silence, spoke their justice in fire and ash. But that's not quite the end. There's one more secret the flames never consumed. October 12, 1851. A cold, iron-gray morning. The crowd stretched from the courthouse square to the river. Farmers, preachers, newspapermen from as far away as Philadelphia. Mothers holding children on their shoulders so they would never forget what female wickedness looked like. 3 ropes swayed gently above the scaffold. Margaret Cunningham stepped forward first. Black dress, hair braided tight as a noose. Not a tremor in her hands. She looked out over the sea of faces as if memorizing every soul who had come to watch her die, the way she once memorized the weight of a man's purse before she killed him. The preacher asked for final words. She gave them a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "We gave them what they came looking for," she said, voice carrying clear to the back row. "Love, peace, a quiet end. If that is sin, then let God judge me. He already knows where to find the rest of you." Catherine came next, barefoot, hair loose, eyes swollen from crying all night. She clutched Sarah's hand like a child afraid of the dark. Sarah never flinched. She stared straight ahead, lips moving in some private prayer, or maybe a recipe. The hoods went on. The trap fell. 3 bodies dropped at once. The crack of necks echoed like rifle shots across the valley. For one heartbeat, the crowd was utterly silent. Then a woman screamed, and the spell shattered. Elizabeth spared the rope because she wept and pointed fingers and called her sisters devils who stole my soul, watched from a barred window in the jail. She screamed until her voice gave out and blood ran from her throat. They say the hangman cut the bodies down at sunset and buried them in quicklime outside the prison walls, without markers, without prayers. Most people believe the story ended there. They were wrong. The mountains still had debts to collect. 1851 to 1888, the long silence. The ruins of Millbrook Inn stood empty for 3 years. Windows blind, doors hanging open like broken jaws. Wisteria strangled the porch where Catherine once greeted lonely men with open arms. Children dared each other to spend a night inside. None ever did. In 1854, the property sold at sheriff's auction to a Richmond family named Fletcher. They lasted 11 months. Guests refused to sleep in the corner room. Horses spooked at nothing. One maid swore she woke to find a cold hand stroking her hair and a woman's voice whispering, "You'll do nicely." The Fletchers left in the middle of the night and never came back. By 1861, the house was a skeleton. Roof collapsed. Floors rotted through. Vines thick as a man's arm crawled over the stones where 43 men had once toasted their last supper. Then came the war. Soldiers, blue and gray both, camped among the ruins. They burned the remaining timbers for firewood. They found things in the ashes: a gold tooth, a mother-of-pearl button, a child's shoe that had never belonged to any Cunningham. They told stories around the fires about the witches of Pine Ridge and laughed to keep from shaking. After Appomattox, a copper company bought the land. They blasted the ridge for ore. In the spring of 1867, their drills broke into a sealed cave no map had ever shown. 43 skeletons spilled out like an accusation. Some still wore scraps of broadcloth and waistcoats. Some had their hands tied with the same silk ribbon Catherine once used to tie back her hair. One skull had a perfect round hole at the base. Heinrich Zimmer's hammer had left its signature after all these years. The foreman wired Richmond. Richmond wired Washington. Reporters came by the train car full. They found Margaret's black ledger wrapped in oilskin and buried beneath the hearthstone. Every page intact, every name, every dollar, every method written in her perfect, murderous copperplate. They found Sarah's botanical journals, hundreds of pages of careful drawings, dosage charts, observations like Victim 29, Mr. Langford, 3.2 grains aconite in brandy. Convulsions lasted 11 minutes. Died smiling. Soul appeared to leave gently. They found a lock of hair from every man, pressed between the pages like flowers. And in the very back of the ledger, in Margaret's hand, a final entry dated the night before the raid. If we burn, let the truth burn with us. But if we hang, remember this. Every man who died here begged to stay. We only gave them forever. The newspapers called it the trial of the century that never needed a jury. Elizabeth Cunningham, 1851 to 1888, the living ghost. While the world argued over bones and ledgers, one sister still breathed. Elizabeth was 30 when they locked her in the Virginia penitentiary. She was 67 when she died. 37 years in a 6x9 cell with one barred window that looked out on the gallows yard. Prison matrons said she never spoke above a whisper. She sewed burial shrouds for executed prisoners, hundreds of them. Her stitches so perfect the warden swore the dead looked almost peaceful. Every October 12th, she refused food and sat on the floor of her cell rocking, humming the same hymn Catherine used to sing to dying men. In 1887, a year before her death, a young reporter named Clara Whitmore bribed a guard for 15 minutes alone with the last Cunningham sister. Clara asked the question the whole country still wanted answered. How many were there really? Elizabeth looked up with eyes the color of creek ice after a hard freeze. 43 that we buried, she whispered, and 7 that we didn't. She would say no more. She died on All Souls' Day, 1888, sitting upright in her chair, hands folded like a child at prayer. The matron who found her swore the old woman was smiling. They buried her in the prison yard beside the lime pit, where her sisters had gone 37 years before. No marquer, no ceremony. But the ground there has never grown grass right. Even today, the weeds come up black and twisted, and dogs refuse to cross it. The ledger that would not burn. In 1923, a flood ripped through Richmond. The State Archives basement filled with 12 feet of water. Hundreds of thousands of documents were destroyed, deeds, wills, Confederate pardons. But when they pumped the basement dry, one thing floated to the surface untouched. Margaret Cunningham's black ledger, oilskin still sealed, pages dry as the day she wrote them. The archivist who found it quit the next week and became a Trappist monk. He never spoke again. The ledger is still there, in a locked, climate-controlled vault. Researchers are allowed to view it only with written permission from the governor and a priest present. They say if you lay your hand on the cover, it feels warm. The mountain today. Drive west out of Abingdon on the old Wilderness Road, and you'll come to a ridge the maps still call Cunningham Bald. There's a historical marker now, bronze, official, sanitized. Site of the Millbrook Inn murders, 1832 to 1851. 43 known victims. Here lie unknown travelers. May they find the peace in death that was denied them in life. What the marker doesn't mention is the second, smaller stone put up by locals in 1974 after hunters kept finding bones the copper company never recovered. It just says, 7 more are still walking. Mind how you go after dark. People claim things on that ridge. Headlights die for no reason. Cell phones go to static. Compasses spin like they're drunk. In 1986, a University of Virginia archaeology team tried ground-penetrating radar around the old herb garden. They found 12 anomalies consistent with graves, too deep, too regular, too wrong. The state shut the dig down before a single shovel broke ground. Some debts, they decided, are better left unpaid. Final reckoning. So is it really only 43? Or did 7 more simply walk away? Men who woke up half-poisoned, hearts fluttering like trapped birds, and saw Catherine's smile change into something else in the lamplight. Men who were carried to the cave, still breathing, buried alive because the dose wasn't quite right, and Sarah hated waste. Men who scratched their way out of soft earth on moonless nights and stumbled down the mountain with no memory but the taste of honey and death on their tongues. Men who changed their names, moved west, and never told their wives why they woke screaming when someone poured them tea. Maybe they're all dead now. Maybe one of them had a grandson who still flinches when a pretty woman smiles at him across a hotel lobby. Maybe the mountain is still keeping score. I want you to think about that the next time you're on a lonely road and the GPS dies and you see a single light glowing warm against the dark. Think about Thomas Kellerman riding up that trail in 1832, half-frozen, desperate for any kindness at all. Think about the smell of venison stew and beeswax candles. Think about 4 sisters waiting with open arms and closed hearts. And whatever you do, never drink anything a stranger offers you with a smile that's just a little too perfect. Because some hungers never die. And some doors, once you step through them, only open one way. The Cunningham sisters are gone, but the mountain remembers. And every October 12th, when the wind comes down off the ridge just right, you can still hear 3 ropes creaking in the dark. And somewhere, very faintly, a woman's voice calling a name that was never yours to begin with. Sleep with the light on, traveler. The night is long, and Millbrook Inn is still taking guests.